Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 212 of the Tick Boot Camp podcast. The title of today's interview is Instinctive and Intelligent, an interview with Tiara Smith. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
Now, we named this episode Instinctive and Intelligent because this is a young woman who actually got Lyme disease through intimate contact with her wife. And even though she was being told that she couldn't get Lyme disease through intimate contact, her gut was telling her that she could. So she took some steps to try to prophylactically protect herself from the disease. Unfortunately, the prophylactic steps did not prevent her from getting the disease. And when she was told that she didn't have Lyme disease, she followed her gut and went forward with treating herself so that she could overcome a disease that she did in fact contract.
Rich, when Tiara failed to get proper recognition and treatment from the medical professionals in her life, she decided to go the natural route and treat herself. She first went to the Restore Kit by Dr. Bill Rawls, and then added on top of that was a ton of other herbal treatments and natural treatments. And today, she's doing much better and has her life back.
So Matt, one of the patterns that we've identified in this podcast is that people who follow their gut and follow the emotional tools that God has given them on their healing journey will generally have a better outcome. And Tiara did just that. Matt, without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Tiara Smith to the Tick Boot Camp community. Hello, Tiara Smith, and welcome to the Tick Boot Camp podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We are really excited to finally have you on the podcast. You gave us a brilliant Lyme hack during our hackathon during Lyme Disease Awareness Month, and we wanted to explore your full journey in a full-length podcast, and that's why we're having you on today. So, Tiara, let's start with where you live.
Yep, so I live in Kansas. I am currently transitioning to moving to Colorado, so I'm very excited about that.
Well, congratulations, and I'm glad Dorothy is leaving Kansas. So tell us about what you do.
Yep, so I work in marketing currently in the financial industry. So I help small businesses with small business financial products to help them achieve financial success.
Okay, and so how long have you been living in Kansas?
Oh my gosh, since third grade, so forever. So this is the first time I am moving out of Kansas. So
talk to us about what it was like to grow up in Kansas.
you know, like we were talking about earlier, lots of references to Dorothy and assumptions of not having electricity and all kinds of fun stuff. But no, in all seriousness, there it depends on where you're at in Kansas, but where I'm at, I've been more so in the suburbs. So there's some stuff to do and you're maybe 30 minutes, shy of some of the fun stuff to do downtown, but there's not a crazy amount of stuff to do. So I'm really looking forward to being out in the mountains and, being free.
So I am going to torture the reference a little bit. So I did fully expect the Tin Man would be sitting next to you and Toto would be in a basket next to you. So I'm sorry, Tiara, I had to do it.
Oh, I dropped Toto off at daycare, actually. So.
So, Tiara, talk to us about what your educational system was like growing up in Kansas.
Yeah, it was great, honestly. So like I said, I grew up in the suburbs of Kansas, more specifically in the Overland Park area. I was very, very fortunate to have such a great school system. I was in a college preparatory program in high school for a couple of years prior to going to college. So I was very, very thankful for that and very, very lucky to have something like that at my disposal. It was one of the top school districts in the area. So I honestly am very, very proud of the fact that I came from there and really set the foundation for where I'm at now.
And where did you go to college and what was your major?
Yep, I went to Kansas State University, go Wildcats, and I was a marketing major.
Now, ironically, Kansas State University has one of the best curriculums for Lyme disease. I came across that when I was doing my research on Lyme, and I'm wondering whether or not that irony is something that you're aware of.
I was not aware of that, honestly. That's great news. I know that they had been doing some pretty great research. Like I know they're known for, especially their veterinary medicine, but I did not know that they had done so much research there. So that's definitely something interesting to dig into.
So let's talk about what you were working toward. You said you were in a college preparatory program during your elementary and high school education. What was it that you were dreaming about doing when you were a young person in Kansas?
So fun fact, I started out in college as a biochemistry major. So with that college prep program, I intended fully to become a doctor. And the funniest part is I'm in business and my sister is now in med school. So we switched. But yeah, my intention honestly was to become a doctor. I had always been very passionate about health. I still am. And I'd always been very passionate about helping people. And all you needed was a couple of college chemistry classes to say, no, thank you. So I learned later on that I was just a lot more social of a person, and I needed to be out of the lab and really communicating with other people. Wanted to be creative, and so that's how I ended up in the field of marketing.
Well, Tiara, one of the things that we know about you from our past contact with you is you're very fit. So talk to us about athletics and fitness and what role that played in your life, going all the way back to your early childhood.
Yeah. So when I was younger, I'm going to be honest and say I was not a hiker. I was not a workout type of person. I didn't know anything about that at all. I wasn't interested in it. I had always been extremely tiny my entire life and didn't take interest in it. And then over time, I just started to kind of realize like my power in college when I started lifting weights for the first time and educating myself on the different muscle groups, and just kind of took off from there. So did that. Of course, you're in college and you gain a little weight because you're fat, you're eating and doing whatever college kids do. And so over time, I was like, I've got to change this. So I started to get healthy, fell off for a little bit, and then ended up a couple of years after college getting back into it. Started with like Weight Watchers. I still wasn't really working out as much, and then ended up working with a bodybuilding and fitness coach, and got really, really heavily into that. So did that for a little while, and kind of, as it relates to the competition part of things, I kind of decided, from a mental health standpoint, probably not best for me. So I got in the shape for it, and then just decided I probably should stop and wanted to stay fit just for myself. And then since then, just kind of stayed in the gym just for my own feelings of, I call it iron therapy. So, just lifting for your own kind of mental benefit, if you will, as well as physical benefits. So yeah, fitness has kind of always been a small part of my life in the beginning, and slowly grew as I started to understand its contribution to mental health, of course, physical health, and just that feeling of accomplishment.
So Tiara, as someone who's going through the college preparatory phase of her life with an interest in concentrating on health and medicine, I'm wondering if any of the courses you took, either science or health courses, gave you any understanding of how to protect yourself from ticks and tick diseases?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I had never heard, sure, when when you're young and you're Girl Scouting and everything, people tell you, make sure, you spray, or make sure, if you have a tick, like pick it off. But outside of that, nobody's ever told me anything about it. And even as it relates to getting into, health and medicine in the beginning of college, nobody has ever mentioned it. And it's honestly, knowing what I know now, extremely astonishing because of how common Lyme disease is. And I just wasn't aware.
So I just want to walk that back a little bit. You implied that you were told, at least during scouting, that that you should be putting on tick spray, or you should be putting on bug spray, and that you were made generally aware of ticks and the need to remove them. Give us some more detail on what you were taught, at least in scouting or in other places, about bug spray and how you should use bug spray to protect yourself. And talk to us about ticks and what you were told about removing ticks.
Yeah. So as it relates to ticks, the only thing I was really told was just to remove them. Wasn't told anything about testing a tick, wasn't told anything about them. I was told that they were bad, but I've heard Lyme disease, but I didn't think, okay, nobody thinks that's going to happen to me if you get bit by a tick. And luckily I hadn't, but there really wasn't much other texture added to that, unfortunately. And as it relates to the bug sprays, I think that was more so about, pests and, pesky bugs, and you don't want to get bit. I really don't think it was grounded in that, caution for that type of transmission to occur.
Okay. Now, we know a little bit about your background and the illness that you had suffered, and we know that you were generally aware of Lyme disease because you're in an intimate relationship with someone who had Lyme before you had gotten Lyme. But let's use that as a line of demarcation. Before you got into the relationship with someone who had Lyme disease, what, if anything, did you know about Lyme other than that it was a disease and it was something you didn't want?
I knew nothing at all. Yeah, I knew nothing. Nobody had ever told me anything about it. I knew absolutely nothing about how destructive it was. I knew nothing about how it was transmitted. I knew nothing.
Did you even, before you entered the intimate relationship with the person who had Lyme disease, do you even know anyone who had a Lyme disease diagnosis?
Absolutely not. I knew no one.
Okay, so now let's talk about you entering into an intimate relationship with someone who had Lyme disease, and how did you find out about her having Lyme disease, and what did that mean to you initially?
Yeah. So at the time we met, she was currently in treatment. I think she had been in treatment maybe for 8 months or so on antibiotics, as well as a plethora of other things. And so when we first met, she did mention to me, hey, I just want to let you know, like, I'm in treatment for Lyme disease, and I may, I'm not sure when. I genuinely think that she thought it was a lot shorter of a timeline. I don't know if that precedent was set with her, with those around her, as far as how long to expect the journey to be. So the way it was presented to me, being a person who I didn't know anything, I was like, okay, like, whatever you need, we'll get through it. I think of you as a person. I don't think of you as anyone who is sick or anything like that. I want to be with you, and that's it. So yeah, I knew nothing about it, but when she told me, I was like, okay, we'll get through this together. And that's all I thought.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second. When you were told that that your partner had Lyme disease, and I'm assuming this is before you got married, you understood that she had Lyme disease. Did you have any fear that your partner's Lyme disease could somehow affect your health?
Not at all. Previously, and from what she had told me as well, it's not something that I could get or catch, if you will. So in my mind, it was just, how do we tackle this together so that she can feel as healthy as possible? It was never like, there was never a fear there. So I didn't fear it at all. I never thought about it. I knew that there's a lot of things that come along with it, but I knew that we would figure it out. So I didn't really have a fear.
Okay, so now I want to talk about fear in two different ways. The first thing is, you didn't have any fear because you didn't receive any information that led you to believe you should have fear, correct?
Correct.
Now talk to me about your gut. Was your gut, or were you emotionally feeling or receiving any signals that suggested to you that you should have something to be concerned about, despite the information that you were getting cognitively?
Yes. So right around, maybe either right before we got married or right when we got married, I started to develop ringing in my ears and tremors. And I started to think, wait a minute, what's wrong with me? Do I have a vitamin deficiency? I was going through the ringer, looking up online, trying to figure out why I was experiencing things. And I was trying to rationalize why it was everything but.
Okay, but I want you to pause there for a second here. I'm asking you a different question. And I do want to get into this piece of your journey. But when you were first introduced to the concept of your partner having Lyme disease, did your gut tell you that despite the information you were receiving that you couldn't get sick from Lyme disease, that perhaps you could get sick from Lyme disease? That's the question I'm asking you.
No. I genuinely did not think that it would happen to me. I
Okay,
did not think I did not think that that was a possibility.
but I'm not even
And
asking about what you're thinking, right? Because I think we talk ourselves out of being in tune with the information that we're getting from our defense system, right? I'm asking you not whether you thought or allowed yourself to think. I'm asking you, were you getting any feelings that led you to believe that perhaps you were unsafe?
at a certain point, yes.
Okay.
And yeah, I was.
Now, were you getting those feelings before you started to get symptoms or after you started to get symptoms?
um, a little bit before I started to think about it. And every time I kind of shrugged it off. And then once I started to have symptoms, I tried to find a reason why, some other reason.
So now the folks in our community know that you're really bright because you were kind enough to do a Lyme hackathon video for us, and it was brilliant, right? So we know how smart you are, and we know how educated you are. Now, when your gut was starting to tell you that perhaps you had some danger, did that trigger you to do any research about Lyme disease, specifically designed not to learn about how to help your partner to get through this, but how to protect yourself from getting this?
Yes. So once I started to do some of that research, I started, so specifically I was reading into Stephen Buchner and his practices, and I started taking Astragalus. I started trying to do some preventative stuff, really trying to cut out some things in my diet in the event, like just to basically make it so my body could never be a home for that.
All right, so you were taking prophylactic steps.
Correct. Yeah, just in case.
Okay, so you read Stephen Buchner's book. You started taking, and I know people pronounce this herb differently, either Astragalus or Astragalus, and Astragalus is designed to enhance our immune system so that we are better equipped to fight off the Lyme bacteria. Correct?
Correct.
And you were also uber fit at the time, right? I mean, you're a fitness gal, right? And you are if you weren't a bodybuilder at that time, you were certainly very fit because you've continued to work out. And were you also engaging in other types of healthy living activities? Like, was your diet clean? Were you staying away from drugs and alcohol? Were you sleeping? Talk to us about that.
So it's good that you asked that, because I look back at that time period and realize that's around the time that I started to get some symptoms, my healthy behaviors had kind of changed. So I was under immense amounts of stress at that time. So my immune system was, I was so very, very stressed. I wasn't sleeping very much at all. Yeah, it was a difficult time, and I don't think my immune system stood a chance at that point.
Okay, so let's talk about the stresses, right? So now your partner has Lyme disease, right? And your partner is going on this journey, and she's in a lot of pain, and she's suffering a great deal, right? What impact did that have on your stress environment or your stress world? And how do you think that may have served as immune disrupting and therefore making you more vulnerable to Lyme disease?
Yeah. So at the time, I really wanted her to get better. And I knew that she had been on antibiotics for quite some time and was telling me how painful it was and all these things. And so I was trying to find solutions during that time, other solutions that would be less painful, that would still be potent. So that's part of why I wasn't sleeping. I was staying up. I was working my full-time job, and then I was staying up and searching everything from Buchner's protocol to bee venom therapy to like just a variety of things, just trying to a raw vegan diet, just trying to help her feel better. And so oftentimes I lost sleep, and of course there's financial stressors. So she wasn't able to work at the time. I was working full time. I was paying all of the bills and everything. So of course there's financial stressors. And you know, as you can imagine, there's some strain. So yeah, it was a lot going on at once. My immune system was certainly impacted, and it just it couldn't handle it.
So talk to us about how your symptoms began to develop and how long into the intimate relationship was it before you started to exhibit symptoms?
So I would say a couple of months after we got married, I started to develop symptoms, and I didn't realize that I was developing symptoms. I just thought my body was doing small, weird things, and then they got progressively worse. So a couple of months into being married is when I noticed.
Now, Tiara, do you ever recall having been bitten by a tick prior to the time when your symptoms began to present?
Nope, not at all. I didn't have any rash. I didn't have any bites anywhere. There was nothing atypical on my body.
Okay. So now you were doing a great deal of research as first as a partner and then as a spouse to try to help your spouse to get through the challenges she was facing, and you were learning about Lyme disease, right? Now, when you were doing this research, did you come across any research that suggested that Lyme disease could be sexually transmitted?
So the research that's out there is far and few between. As far as formal research, fortunate, because you got so many, oh, maybe it's possible because it's a Cypriote. Like, no syphilis, it's a Cypriote. And then you have other people in the camp of absolutely not. So, or people saying absolutely yes. And during that time, you know, I had been on many different Lyme groups just that I had been on when supporting her. And I saw a lot of anecdotal evidence, people saying that they were getting it from their spouses. People whose spouses had gotten it, you know, let's say got bit by a tick in an area somewhere and they were not with them. So they weren't, you know, bit with them. There are a lot of people even to this day that I see that have said they have gotten it through that method of transmission. And it just blows my mind that there's so little research out there. And so contradictory of information, even from different Lyme literate doctors.
So Tiara, so when you first start exhibiting these symptoms, you know, just to set a context, right? You had done some research which suggested that it probably was not sexually transmitted or transmittable. Your gut was telling you that perhaps it was, so you were taking Astragalus and you were trying to at least take some prophylactic steps to protect yourself. And you start to have these symptoms, and what are you doing? Are you talking yourself out of believing they were Lyme symptoms, or are you going to try to get early treatment or early intervention?
Yeah. So when that happened, I I first tried to talk myself out of it and say that that's not what it was and it couldn't possibly be. And over time, the symptoms started to get worse. Muscle spasms. I have videos of my face, my lips, you know, spasming, my muscles doing crazy spasms on my legs. And it got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend. So I went to my primary care and I told her my suspicions, had a test done. And that's where this all started. And I realized that I wasn't, it wasn't anxiety. I wasn't crazy, as you call it, or as some doctors made it seem.
So how long after you first started exhibiting the symptoms was it before you were tested? Meaning, what was that window of time between first symptoms and test where you were diagnosed with Lyme disease?
I was, let's see. So repeat that again. I'm sorry.
What was the window of time?
Sorry.
No, I understand. What was the window of time between when you first started your Lyme disease symptoms and when you were finally tested and diagnosed with Lyme disease?
Gotcha. Yeah. So it had been at least like 3 or 4 months. And when you say diagnosed, so, and I wrote this, but it's a very weird, tricky thing. So when I had my first test done, I was positive for one band, and I was told you were positive for one band, but you know, that doesn't mean you're CDC positive. So, you know, you're good to go. And I'm like, oh, okay. Why is it positive? And I didn't get an answer, right? So they moved me on to a neurologist. And they try to look for things like any type of nerve, because I was having tremors, I was having spasms, so they were like, what can we do? Can we look into things like Parkinson's or MS, or what do we need to look into? So I saw a neurologist, and then I went to and got an MRI, and that came back all fine. So they said, you're fine, nothing's wrong with you, right? And then I went and did a test myself with DNA Connections, and came back for 2 strains of Borrelia. And then I was like, okay. And, I've got my PCP in the background saying, it could just be your anxiety. You're in a really stressful situation, and telling me maybe you just need to go to therapy, because I was waking up every single day with my heart racing at that point. And I couldn't control it, and I didn't know why. So after that, I was like, can you just run another test again? Like, I just need to know what's going on. Like, I know it came back positive, but I need, maybe more time has passed. Maybe we caught it too early, or I'm sorry, maybe I came in too early. Let's try again. And I still came back positive for 1 band. And I'm like, okay. And she said, and I'm not gonna, it's probably not verbatim, but what she basically said was, I know you're exhibiting symptoms, but with you only having 1 band positive, I don't know if I feel right giving you antibiotics. And so I'm like, okay. But at the same time, seeing, what I had seen from my ex-spouse, going through what she went through, I knew antibiotics wasn't the route I wanted to take anyway. I just needed someone to call a spade. And for me to know, okay, we're doing this. You need to start taking care of your body in this way to combat what's going on. So, yeah, it was a journey. And they tried to send me to infectious disease. And after doing a lot of reading and hearing from a lot of people, they were like, it's probably not going to help you, and you already have the answers that you need. So I kind of went on my self-treatment journey, and I'm so glad I did when I did, because at that point, even seated, my legs were extremely weak and tired, barely doing anything. My heart rate was extremely elevated. I was waking up every morning with a racing heart. My tremors were crazy. Spasms all over the place. I was getting them, in my arm at one moment, in my leg the other moment, and it was all day. So I knew I had to do something, and I felt like my body was attacking me.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second, because Matt's going to take you on the first the self-treatment and ultimately the medical treatment journey that you've gone on. But I have a lot of questions that I still want to ask you up to this point. So yeah. So your gut was telling you that you probably needed to protect yourself. You start taking the Astragalus. You then start to have your symptoms. You start to test, which is beginning to show you that you do have it, right? You have a band from the initial test you took. You take the DNA Connections test, and you have more bands, right? So you're starting to see that the testing is showing that that you have had come in contact with Lyme disease. Were you thinking at that time that that you received the contact with the bacteria through your intimate contact with your spouse, or did you think it was possible that you were bitten by a tick?
I don't think it was possible that I was bit by a tick, only because at that time I hadn't been hiking in a really, really long time. I hadn't ever seen any symptoms or any, no fever, no rash, no bite site, I hadn't seen any of those kind of common characteristics. Even if there weren't a rash, I hadn't seen a bite. So I really didn't think so. My brain automatically went to that because my gut previously had told me, wait a minute, something's not right. So yeah, my gut told me that it was probably from intimate contact, unfortunately.
Okay. Now, do you believe there's no way that you could have been bitten by a tick at any time in your life prior to that, and your symptoms then just began to exhibit because of the stresses in your life?
Correct. I genuinely don't think that. And I had gone through stressful times previously in my life, never exhibited any symptoms at all. So yeah, this is the first time ever in my life that I had started to have such harsh symptoms happen to me.
Now let's talk about how we can rule out all of these other potential options, right? Because it's very common, and there's a lot of research that shows that many people who have Lyme disease, who are married to another person or have an intimate relationship with another person, have Lyme disease. But that has been explained away by, doctors, all over the Lyme community, including Dr. Brian Fallon in his book, and he's one of the stars of the community. And his argument is that the reason so many spouses have Lyme disease is because they're both living in a tick endemic community, and because they're both living in a tick endemic community, it is very likely that they're both coming in contact with infected ticks. That it's not the intimate contact, despite the research showing that the spirochetes are in vaginal secretions and in sperm, that it's actually the physical presence in a tick endemic community that's causing spouses to both be sick, not the intimate contact. What's your reaction to that?
It's a little frustrating. So I will tell you, given that this is how it's been suspected that it was transmitted to me, it's a pretty invalidating thing, not being able to find much that tells you that this is what happened to you, because I don't have a doubt in my mind that this is what happened to me. It's frustrating, to say the least. I can just leave it at that.
Yeah, so Lyme disease itself is very frustrating for a number of different reasons, including not having a real definition for this disease. Is it an infection from one bacteria? Is it an infection from multi-germs? Is it something altogether different? And now we have this additional level of invalidation, which is you can't get it the way you believe you got it, right? So talk to us about how that impacted you emotionally, at least at the beginning.
Oh my gosh, it was, as you saw with some of the stuff, the negative stuff that came in, it was really, really hard behind the scenes, hearing that be invalidated. Because for someone who's going through it, it is it is extremely real. So to see that not even being a reason that's validated, I mean, first of all, in the Lyme community, so many people are invalidated in general, regardless of method of transmission. So to pass that on and to invalidate another person, and it's really shocking too when you think about. I think about my Lyme tip, and just believing yourself, trusting your intuition. I can't tell you how many people in my life, family, who have invalidated what I have gone through, because I just don't understand. And I have to have that frame of mind of realizing that they genuinely do not understand, especially this method, right? When people talk about sexual transmission of anything, this is not something that's ever talked about, ever. So, it's frustrating to feel that invalidated, and hopefully with time, research catch up. But it sounds like there's a long way to go, not just in this type of transmission, but also just in Lyme in general. There's a long way to go.
So Tiara, did the invalidating nature of the method of transmission cause you to delay in either seeking treatment from doctors or delay in any self-treatment that you pursued?
100%, because I was in denial. I was convinced by others around me that it wasn't real. Therefore, other people saying, oh, well, I have twitches all the time, so that can't be what happened to you. That's not real. Nobody's talked about that. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten that, or, you're just anxious and you're just, coming down from being anxious. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
So let's talk about where you were when your symptoms were developing and you started to get sick, right? We know that grief is a part of a response to illness, and we know that the grief cycle begins with denial, right? So when we're in that state of denial ourselves emotionally, and then we have all this invalidation around us, it causes us to get stuck at the denial phase, and it paralyzes us from moving first through the grief cycle and ultimately to a place where we're going to begin treatment.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm upsetting you. And we really appreciate you sharing this journey with our community.
Yeah, there's a grief cycle. Sorry. I had to. Sorry, guys.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, we really appreciate you being so vulnerable with us and with, with our listeners.
So I had to accept it, that it happened to me, and it took a long time because I've always been a very healthy person. And I would have never thought that this would have happened to me. So it took me a very long time to accept that it did. It took me a very long time, and I'm not going to pretend like I don't go in and out of sometimes feeling like, wow, like this really happened to me. This is something that it's not where you can take NyQuil and it goes away. So yeah, I have had quite a bit of different stages of everything from grief to anger to sadness, a little bit of regret, a lot of bit of regret actually. But yeah, I went through a huge cycle, and I still every now and then find myself in one of those stages. But I try to arrive back at being thankful for where I'm at with my health, and how I'm so much more able than I was in the beginning when everything was crazy and my symptoms were coming out of nowhere and I didn't know what to do. So, but yeah, I'd be lying if I said that I didn't sometimes go through that not so fun.
So Tiara, let's talk about your health and the privilege of having the health that you had before you got sick, and how taking that for granted made the grief cycle more painful for you and made the denial phase a longer and more paralyzing phase in the grief cycle.
Yeah. Can you say that again? I'm sorry. I'm a little.
Talk to us. Talk. You said you were always healthy before this had happened.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'd like you to talk to us about how the privilege of your prior healthy life and taking that for granted made the grief cycle more painful and may have played a role in causing you to be stuck at the denial phase and therefore paralyzing you from taking action.
Yeah, I have been healthy all of my life. I had never experienced any type of plight as it relates to health, and I was certainly in denial because I hadn't experienced it. And once I started to develop symptoms, before calling a spade, so to speak, I just remember, and I've written about it, but I just remember certain things for granted. So my ceiling fan, the sound of my ceiling fan without hearing any tinnitus, or even now there are times, so I appreciate things like the sunrise. I always have, but I appreciate them so much more. They're a little different now. I've got floaters in my vision, right? So looks a little different. But whenever there's less of them, I appreciate it. So I did not realize how much of a privilege I had before to look at a sunrise without floaters, to hear things without tinnitus, to not have to take 24 pills. I didn't realize how much of a privilege I had to not have to think about what I'm eating, and its contribution to my health, which I should have anyway. But I did not have to think about those things. And someday I wish I didn't have to. Anybody does. But I'm here now, and it has honestly made health become my top priority every single day.
So Tiara, you had mentioned earlier that it sounded like you were being a little hard on yourself for taking a little bit longer to get to the point where you knew you had to treat Lyme disease. But in listening to you and Rich talk, your doctors were telling you didn't have Lyme disease. Your doctors were telling you only had one band and that was all in your head, and it was your stress, and you were going through a very difficult marriage at the time. So the fact that you went on despite medical professionals telling you weren't sick, and then treated anyway and self-diagnosed and got better, I think is a really powerful statement to your strength. And I just don't, I want you to reflect back on that and not be so hard on yourself, because you are the reason you are feeling better today, not doctors.
You're right. Yeah, whenever I have a moment where I feel kind of, whatever that's any of that, sad stage or whatever, I remind myself saying like, you healed you. I may not be 100% in remission, but you did what you needed to do, and you advised yourself. You read, you got the things that you needed to, you avoided the things that you were supposed to. You got yourself to this point where there was a point where I wasn't even able to just bend over, stretch, and touch my toes without shaking. My legs shaking like crazy. And so the fact that I'm able to do that, I'm able to, lift weights, doesn't mean I don't get a little bit shaky, still, but I'm mostly okay. Like with my herbs and whatnot, I'm probably at 90% when I'm on them. So my point is, I have moments like that where yes, I maybe don't give myself enough credit, to your point. But I do have moments every now and then where I'm like, I did that. I didn't have somebody do it for me. I didn't have somebody tell me what to do. I did that, and I didn't pay someone to do it. I did that. So I couldn't even tell you how thankful I am to have had access to the knowledge that I did to be able to do that, because there's so many other people who are in a completely different camp and are in crazy amounts of debt and have been treating for 10 years. And my heart goes out to them because, oh God, I couldn't even imagine.
So Tiara, you were in a place where doctors wouldn't even prescribe you antibiotics when you realized I have Lyme, and you think it was at the early stages. And then to your point, you didn't have to go and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to put yourself in debt. You found a way to properly treat using affordable natural medicine. So talk to us about how you found the herbs and the protocols that you started to self-treat with, because doctors wouldn't even recognize that you were sick, and then what it was like when you first started taking these treatments.
Yeah, so my previous spouse who had Lyme during that time, I really wanted her to get better, and so I took that time to really do some research. So I was up at night, reading different herbal protocols, reading about certain diets, reading about how people had eradicated it themselves when the medical system hadn't been what they'd expected. And so, even now I've got from Buchner's books to Dr. Rawls books to medical mediums books. And it really took a second to dive in and understand what was going on in my body. That doesn't mean that I don't have days where I'm like, what is this? But I took so much time, and still do, reading up in groups, understanding things, and really trying to work towards continually getting better on my own treatment plan, I guess you could say. So, and being able to do it naturally with herbs is incredible. I've always been, a person who's really into nature, and to be able to apply that to my own body to get better, as well as diet, is everything to me.
So Tiara, talk to us about, after reading Stephen Buchner's books and then following Dr. Rawls, whose herbal protocol is based off of the Buchner protocol, and then also following the medical medium, what protocol did you build for yourself to start treating your Lyme disease?
Yeah, so I first started using the Buchner protocol because that's what I had seen had worked for my ex-spouse, and I thought it would work for me, but I was still having a lot of twitching. It just wasn't getting me where I wanted to be, but I knew that those herbs, the Japanese knotweed, the cat's claw, the andrographis, I knew sarsaparilla, I knew that those were going to help me. So it may have just been whether it's different dosages or other things that my body needed. So I switched over to Dr. Rawls, but I took a little bit of Buchner's plan as well. So I'm on Dr. Rawls Vital Restore Kit. I'm taking the 4 bottles. And then I'm also on 2 tinctures. Sometimes I'll add another, but I'm on Japanese knotweed just because it's just extremely powerful and antimicrobial. And then I'm also taking Sida Akuda for biofilm. I'm also every day I'm drinking cistus and canis tea for biofilm as well. And also just finding that balance with diet. So I was already eating a vegan diet, but now it's more so in a raw kind of more fruit and veggie based diet to not allow my body to be a home for these little bugs. So a conjunction of many things.
Okay, so Tiara, I want to kind of recap some of the things you just discussed with us. So you're now taking Dr. Rawls' Restore Kit, and you're in good company because literally I take the 4 bottles twice a day. Rich is on it on half dose because Rich, thank God, is not sick from tick-borne illness, but he's taking it just for his general health. And we're both having some great benefits from it. But, one of the things we've learned from Dr. Rawls is sometimes you need to take a little bit more of something, and everybody's a little bit different. So you have to you may have to tweak it. So I know there's Japanese knotweed in the Restore Kit, but it sounds like you're supplementing even more Japanese knotweed to really have that antimicrobial property beyond what's in the Restore Kit. Is that what you're doing?
Correct. Yep. I'm taking 2 droppers, or a dropper in the morning and a dropper at night, both Saida Kuda and Japanese knotweed. I will tell you and I really had to find what worked for me. So, with the protocol, I wasn't getting as much of that relief as I wanted. I was getting crazy foot aches and pains. I was still getting the twitching everywhere, and it was driving me insane. So I started taking the Dr. Rawls. I added the Japanese knotweed. At one point, I had started taking a little bit of, what is it called? Cryptolepis. As well as some euthero root for my nervous system. And I still take it from time to time, but my main, the main attraction, so to speak, Japanese knotweed and Saida Kuda, they've done wonders for me. And I will tell you, when I'm on them, I maybe have 1 to 3 twitches a day. Other than that, I feel so normal. I still have spotty vision, which, that'll be over time. But I was just telling someone about how previously, when things started to get bad, I would smile. And I'm a smiley person. I love smiling. I would smile and my face would shake like crazy. Or I would yawn and I couldn't even keep my face straight. And now I can do all of those things, and it's not shaking anymore, and I'm not insecure about it. I'm not, because I used to be terrified of my own body at that point, just with everything going on. So the Saida Kuda, the Japanese knotweed, and then Vital Restore Plan have done wonders for me, and I've recommended the Vital Restore Plan to a lot of people because it's honestly changed my life.
So I just want to stop for a second and recognize that. So I know a lot of people have heard us talk about Dr. Rawls, and now they're hearing about the Restore Kit. And I think it's important to note, because of certain regulations, Dr. Rawls is not able to really promote his specific products. He's only able to really talk in generalities about herbs on his webinars through his main Rawls MD social media and website. But Dr. Rawls, based on what he teaches through his Rawls MD side, has an entire supplement, basically branch or arm to his business, which is called Vital Plan. And Vital Plan sells the Restore Kit, which is literally everything Dr. Rawls talks about to treat chronic Lyme disease. And although it can't be properly marketed as a chronic Lyme disease treatment, which it is, but he's not allowed to say because of FDA regulations, it has helped countless people recover from chronic Lyme disease. And it has a wide variety of herbs and supplements and things in it to help you overcome Lyme by building your immune system and fighting off a wide variety of pathogens, not just the Lyme bacteria. Because as you know, Tiara, it's never just Lyme. There's other things going on, whether it's reactivated Epstein-Barr virus, whether it's parasites, whether it's whatever it may be. The Restore Kit helps address all of those pathogens, and it really helps modulate, reset, and rebuild your immune system, which gives your body a fighting chance to now recover and rebound from chronic illness. So I just wanted to make sure that we pointed that out so people understand what specific products we take by Dr. Rawls. And to complement that, you did mention that you tried Cryptolepis, which is, I know, something that is really powerful. And all these studies coming out of Johns Hopkins have shown that Cryptolepis is not only great for Lyme disease and Bartonella and Babesia and Anaplasma, but it's just generally good from an antimicrobial standpoint, generally speaking. It sounds like in your experience, that wasn't something that was super helpful in your journey. So could you talk to us about Cryptolepis with your personal experience and what your reaction was to it?
So I'll just say, I think I'm very fortunate in a sense that I caught things at a time where my herpes reactions are not as bad. So, as far as my reaction to crypto, I would say, like, I haven't felt a lot, but I also previously before that was doing, Japanese knotweed, Saida Kuda, Saida is especially pretty strong. So, when I started with Japanese knotweed, for example, I was getting like numbness in my feet. And, when I do certain things like, even my infrared sauna, I have increased symptoms for maybe 2 days. So luckily with crypto, for whatever reason, I didn't feel much kickback after taking it. So I'm very, very fortunate in that sense. I never know with me what's going to give me much of a herx. Like for some people, cystis and canis tea gives them a crazy herx. I drink it every day and I'm okay. So I really think it has everything to do with where I was able to catch things in my journey, to where crypto, even though it is quite strong, it hasn't given me a crazy reaction, thankfully.
All right, so Tiara, we talked about the Restore Kit, which we know is a wide variety of urban supplements. We talked about Cryptolepis and we talked about Japanese knotweed to supplement what's already in the Restore Kit. But you keep mentioning, and I'm probably going to say it wrong, the Phyta acuta, which is, I believe you said it's for biofilm. So is that another herb? Is it a capsule with herbal powder? Is it a tincture? What is it? And specifically, what does it do to treat Lyme disease?
Yeah, so it's herbal tincture, and what it does is it assists in breaking up the biofilm, similar to what NAC does. So I picked that up from Buchner's protocol, and whenever I don't take it, I can tell. It makes a huge difference for me, especially with my twitches. So I typically get that in an herbal tincture. I've heard of people getting it in powdered form and putting it in capsules, but for me personally, for convenience, I do it in herbal tincture.
And then you've also been talking about this cystis, and I think you said cystis and canis tea. I'm probably butchering that as well, and I apologize. But what function is that? So are those herbs that are diluted into a tea that have a positive impact on killing off Lyme bacteria?
That's correct. It is. It's more so a biofilm buster as well. So with Vital Restore, the aim is to kill off the Lyme, so to speak. But with Phyta acuta as well as cystis and canis, it's to help break up that biofilm for those that are, I don't want to say free floating, but kind of once they die off. And so I take that, or I drink that every day. It's just in a little pouch. I get a pouch of 200 off of Amazon. And it's just the herb in a pouch that you can make just like any kind of tea, like a green tea. And I drink that every day with lemon and honey, and I think it's definitely helped.
So I'm sorry, Tiara. So let's talk about herxing, because we know when you take biofilm herbs, generally you will herx. Well, some people will herx from it. So when you take the Phyta acuta and the cystis and canis, again, I apologize for probably mispronouncing it. Are you herxing from that, or did you herx in the beginning from those two biofilm treatments?
At the beginning, I started to get numbness, and I started getting for a little while. Like I was wondering, why am I twitching so much more? I'm taking something for it, but over time that started to dissipate. I will also tell you that an integral part of not having such bad reactions is I'm doing coffee enemas pretty regularly. At one point I was doing them every day. They have done so much for me as far as detox goes. I have an infrared sauna. I don't use that as much due to EMF, but I do use it. And then of course, your typical like Epsom salt bath. So detox, I think, is also going to play a large role as it relates to Herxheimer reactions.
I think that's a really powerful tip, that if people are listening and they're experiencing herxes, or they're worried about taking something like a biofilm buster because of the herx, there are tools to either lessen or almost eliminate the herx by doing detox protocols like coffee enemas, detox baths like Epsom salt baths, and even doing things like infrared saunas and having a plant-based diet. All those things will help you have less reactions to biofilm busters, it sounds like you're saying.
Yeah. The way that I understood it, just in the reading that I've done, when someone, has a Herxheimer reaction, it has to do with the fact that your body, with whatever you're taking has killed off, a certain amount of that Lyme. And so, your body can only, once it's killed off, can only process so much out at a time. And so those detox methods are to really assist the body in releasing some of that. With the coffee enemas helping stimulate the liver, right, and things like exercise and sweating, right, that help with moving the lymphatic system, which is essentially the sewer of the body, right. So just all those different things put together really, really help. You know, we eliminate in many different ways, through sweat, through waste, which I don't have to talk about that one. And then, you know, just making sure that we're really adequately hydrating, because everything, like even lemon water, you know, even lemon water is great in alkalizing the body and also getting things out of the body in terms of detox. So it's a combination of methods, but I will say tried and true for me is the coffee enemas.
So let's talk more about the coffee enemas, because I don't know if you know Kristen Nanos, who we love. She now runs an awesome Lyme support group. So if you don't know about it, people can go check her out at on Instagram and join her group that she's doing now twice a week. But she's always talking about coffee enemas in helping her with parasites and healing from Lyme disease. And I have to be honest, I still haven't tried it because it just seems so intimidating. Although Krista does make it, you know, really sound less intimidating. How can you convince people, Tiara, who are listening, that it's not as scary as it sounds, and really it's worthwhile, and the benefits far outweigh the potential scariness of doing a coffee enema?
So I could understand why it would be scary. You know, it's something, from what I've read, it's years and years ago that was actually very popular. Like I want to say in ancient Egypt times, it was very popular that people were doing enemas, even in general, that type of health. I know that it can be intimidating. However, we really have to think about the benefits. And for me, you know, it's almost become meditative. Not almost, it has. So, you know, we'll get the coffee boiled, get it all in the bags. I've got hooks where I put, you know, my enema bag, right? And then, you know, turn on some guided meditation or some sound bowls, and really just take that as time while you're holding it, because you typically hold it for 15 minutes. To just reflect or meditate. And it's a really transformative time, I feel like. Now, I'm not going to say that it's not a little, you know, you get a little crampy every now and then just because you've got liquid going through your system. But I promise you, when you do a couple of them, and this is probably gross, but when you see, like, you know, you mentioned parasites, real thing, very real. When you see what comes out, because you can't just treat Lyme, you have to treat parasites too. So we all have them. So when you see what comes out, you will be, I think, a little addicted to seeing, like, wow, like I was able to do that for myself and release those things. But just think about what it could do for you in terms of ridding your body of parasites, stimulating your liver, and a bunch of other things.
So Tiara, there's no such thing as too much information here on the Tick Bootcamp podcast. And now you have Rich and I curious about what actually comes out of these coffee enemas. So if you're comfortable, no pressure, can you talk to us about some of the things you've seen come out of a coffee enema? Because you're right, it's not just Lyme disease. There are viruses, there are parasites, all kinds of stuff accumulates in your colon, and all these things make you toxic and keep you sick. So what things have you seen come out of you that sort of inspire you to keep going because you realize, wow, that was in me and keeping me sick?
Yeah, so you got to identify them first, because sometimes they're kind of hard to identify and it's kind of gross, but you kind of got to look at them. You're like, what is in there? It's gross, but I've seen, you know, liver flukes. I've seen little tiny, I don't know if it was a worm, but it kind of looked like it, like little tiny ones. And you just don't realize, especially with, you know, parasites feed off of dairy, especially, you don't realize, you know, how much sometimes we're nurturing and really having that symbiotic relationship with the parasites. So doing, you know, a coffee enema and seeing that stuff in there is like a wow moment of just realizing, like, A, what you're doing for yourself, but B, oh my God, that's been in my body. You know what I mean? So yeah, just being able to do that for yourself, I think, is pretty empowering. And seeing what comes out, you're like, just get it all out of me. Disgusting. So that's how I feel about it.
I have to ask you, and this is probably something that I would want to do, but now that you basically have proven you have Lyme and co-infections and parasites, and you've been feeling better because of self-treating yourself, have you gone back to any of your doctors and said, I told you so, you know, you should learn from me and help your other patients? Or did you just totally give up on your doctors and now just go on the self, you know, exploration and treatment and diagnosis journey?
Honestly, I would love that satisfaction. But I just decided this was the start of my own self-healing journey, because it was honestly the catalyst to so many things in my life changing for the better. So I want to go back and be like, hey, I you know, healed myself. What do you have to say for yourself? But honestly, I what I think is, people aren't as educated on this. They're doing what they were taught. They don't know. And so in their minds, they think that they're doing the right thing for you. But in reality, it's really hindering your progress. So I try to keep that frame of mind of like, you know what? They don't know what they don't know. I didn't know what I didn't know before. So I'm going to continue on with my journey and regard it as that. Because that's the easiest thing for me to do, is just think of it as like, you didn't know. It's fine. I figured it out.
And it's very gracious of you to be so kind towards your doctors. But, Rich and I look at it like, and we were told by various specialists like Dr. McDonald, who we had on the podcast, who's a brilliant, brilliant doctor. And we've had Dr. Shea, who's a brilliant tick-borne illness neuropsychologist specialist, that all psychological problems have a physical or physiological root cause. And the thing is, if your doctors are telling you, Tiara, you're stressed and all of your physical symptoms are because of something mental health related, they should have dug deeper, in our opinion. And I understand that maybe they don't understand how deep it is now that the three of us know, but I think it just does such harm to people in the community when they say you're just stressed, it's just anxiety. Well, what is causing that, especially when you didn't have it before? Let's dig deeper as a team to figure out what's going on and help me get better and not mask my problems. And that's really, really dangerous for everybody. So I understand you're being very kind, but I think I have a much stronger position for those doctors to say they need to catch up. They need to understand what the truth is, and they need to be able to help people, because this is a pandemic, Lyme disease and tick-borne illness, and it's just getting worse. And people are going misdiagnosed for decades and suffering unnecessarily because they don't know what's going on. And I think, thankfully, because you were so smart, Tiara, and because you were so driven to feel better, you self-diagnosed yourself in a short period of time, and then you wouldn't even get treated by doctors. You had to self-treat yourself as well. So I just think that you're, and not to belittle your experience, but you're one of the lucky ones compared to people who suffer for decades. And I think the knowledge you're sharing and the shortcuts you're sharing are going to help people listening, but doctors have to do better, in my opinion.
I do have my moments where I say, oh my gosh, I can't, that so many people are suffering and have been suffering for so long. And they have this feeling of hopelessness. And the fact that so many people with 10 years, 20 years had no idea giving this bacteria the ability to continue to advance and progress in their bodies, it's astonishing. So you're right. I was being too nice. It's infuriating. If I would have listened to gaslighting from doctors, if I would have listened to gaslighting from my family, I can guarantee you I would not be in the health that I'm in today. And so, yeah, I am frustrated with doctors because you trust them. You put your trust in them. You put your dollars in them, right? And if they, well, quite frankly, fail you because, you're relying on them to say, hey, this is wrong. Let's fix this so you can be better. And that's not even being recognized for years on end. It's like, what do you do? Who do you tell to remedy this? Because there's so many years of your life lost. And that's why I'm so thankful for the way that I went through things, because I could have ended up the exact same way, having the lack of knowledge previously and ending up sick possibly, and then going through the system like everybody else. So I'm extremely thankful and disheartened, and so glad that the organizations like, your podcast exists, because it is so easy. It would be so easy for someone to get Lyme, so much easier than I ever knew. And even easier to be kind of sort of led astray and abandoned by the medical industry. So
my final question, Tiara, before I hand you back over to Rich, is you are very smart. You've learned a lot in a short period of time, and you've done so much to help yourself all by yourself. So most people who listen to this podcast are either those suffering from chronic Lyme and trying to get through it, or supporters of people that are suffering from chronic Lyme. So what advice would you give people listening to this podcast to give them hope that they can and will get better? Because many people have just given up, frankly.
Yeah. So every single day, you are going toward healing, and it may be tiny or micro steps, but every day you're going toward healing. I remember in the beginning thinking like, oh my gosh, like how is, but the way that some of my tremors and whatever else were going on, I was like, this is a huge issue in my body. How is this going to get better? Because I'd love to be better tomorrow, and that's not how it works. So number one, I just want them to know it's okay to feel how you feel. Because like I said, when I spoke earlier, I went through that process of feeling sad and hopeless and feeling like, I don't know how things are going to get better, how long it's going to take. but time is your best friend. And also trusting yourself and your intuition is your absolute best friend, because it will never steer you wrong.
So Tiara, we talked a little bit about the grief cycle earlier, and you actually went through all of the different phases in a very powerful way. But we see one of two things happening when people get in the grief cycle. They either stay in the cycle and they cycle down, or they get to the end of the cycle where they accept the reality of their situation, and they then create something new. So talk to us about how you've created something new, how you are now a new creation, and what you learned about your superpowers that you're now helping other people in the community.
Yeah, so I have come across some people who are going through the thick of it, and who have tried some other therapies. And even though I'm not a doctor, I don't have the answers. I can tell them what worked for me, and what works for me doesn't necessarily work for everybody else, but I can certainly try. I can ask them, have you thought about this? What about this? Are you self-treating? Do you have a doctor? Have you considered this? And I really just try to be, sometimes for people, I just try to be the person that they vent to, because I think that's what everybody wants. Like, when you go through this, nobody understands you. Nobody gets what you're going through. So I try to be that person who listens, even to a stranger I don't know at all. But I also try to ask those questions to try and, because those are the questions I had to ask myself, to kind of jog and figure out what I could do to change the trajectory of things. So I really do try to be that listener and that sounding board, but I also try to be that person that kind of empowers them to feel like they can also do some things to positively contribute to their health, and not just have it in the hands of somebody else.
Well, let's also talk about your willingness to become a leader, because you've become a leader in this community. You've participated in our Lyme hackathon. You are now serving as one of our guests on the long form podcast. And you're willing to do that on a subject that's really touchy and very controversial, and that is the sexual transmission of Lyme. So talk to us about why you're willing to be brave and be the face of this very controversial topic, in part because of the puritanical nature of our society, and in part because of the invalidating nature of Lyme very generally in the sexual transmission of Lyme.
Yeah, so I'm going to be honest and say that there were some times where I thought maybe I shouldn't do this because I was nervous. It's not exactly something everyone wants to stand up and say, yep, this happened to me. This is what, but I realized people need someone to say, this happened to me, and if it happened to you, it's okay. And it doesn't mean that because it's not as widely researched that it's not real. People need that. And I hope to be that beacon of hope for them, no matter how awkward it may be. I hope to be that beacon of hope for them. And I hope that they trust themselves, and they don't put off treatment, right? Because the earlier you catch things, the better, I swear. And just trust yourself, because everyone else around you will be too busy, unfortunately, gaslighting you. You are your only source of validation sometimes, and that's okay. So I hope that I can instill that in other people. And if I'm still, like I said, I'm, if anybody needs to vent or talk about it, I'm here, because I get it. It's been a wild ride, but I want to be the person that people can talk to, because this is a really strange, awkward, but very relevant and very common topic.
So Tiara, you're our 212th guest, and I've asked every guest before you the same question that I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to ask you a different question. And the question I'm going to ask you is, if you're in an intimate relationship with somebody who has Lyme disease, what steps would you take to protect yourself from having to deal with the suffering that unfortunately you would have to deal with if you contract Lyme disease through your intimate contact with your partner?
So I would just have to say, just protect yourself. Now that you're equipped with the knowledge of knowing that that's possible, just protect yourself physically, and just know, that that's a possibility, and potentially even proactively treat, like with herbs. There's can't hurt you. That's my personal opinion. But just preventative herbs like astragalus, or I guess other people pronounce it differently, but astragalus, and just focus on keeping your immune system healthy, right? Low stress, good sleep, good diet, some exercise. And that's it. Just protect yourself, and continue to love the person that you love.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with our guest, Tiara Smith. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Tiara Smith, please visit our Instagram page at naturally.me.t. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of our post. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick Bite Blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. Please note we would appreciate any input or any improvements you would like to share with us. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, we thank you, our community, for your comments on our past podcast episodes. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on Apple Podcasts, on Instagram, or on our website. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews we get. Thank you, as always, for listening.